So I'm filming my mom who's visiting from Albany, New York, and we're gonna go through some photos that I have in my living room, and where I get a lot of my interest and experience in farming is from my mom's side. So we have a very deep history, and I've never learned it, so my mom has agreed to share, the knowledge and history of our family. So
I think we need to start with my grandmother, my father's mother, Johanna Ivanka Nemec, who then eventually married my grandfather, John Bulich. They're from part of the world near the Hungarian border with Croatia, and they came to this country just before World War I. They actually came separately. My grandfather came in 1913, and he worked as a riveter on the ships in the New York, New Jersey harbor. My grandmother actually came twice. She came when she was in her early teens, and she was actually sent back to Europe because there was no one here to greet her as was required. And so she was sent back, and then she actually came again right around 1919. And she met my grandfather in the New York, New Jersey area, and
they didn't know each other before they came, right?
No, they did not know each other before they came. Actually, my grandfather was married to a Polish woman, and she died of the Spanish flu. They had two young babies, and my grandmother had a child of her own, and my grandmother was hired to take care of the children, and then they fell in love and formed their family.
So in this photo, point to...
This is my grandmother, Johanna, and then this is her father, Franco Nemec.
God, I love that mustache.
And this is her brother, Franco. And my father, Frank Bulich, is named after them. These are two of her two sisters. They actually came to this country, and we knew and spent some time with one of my grandmother's sisters, Catherine, who lived nearby.
And so when they lived in Hungary and the border of Croatia, they did a lot of farming.
So the little village where my grandmother came from today is a place of vineyards and fruit trees, rolling hills. And so I grew up around people that, they grew things. And of course, at that time, most people in rural America had to grow things. They grew their own food. They raised their own cattle. They had a cow for butter and milk. Mm-hmm. They had chickens. And this picture actually right here is my grandfather.
Well, here's their wedding photo, right? So that's...
Oh, yes. So they got married. And then eventually they moved up to an area in the southern part of the town of Catskill, which used to be called Stanton because there were cement plants there. And a number of Croatian immigrants and other ethnic groups located there to work in the cement plants. At the time, there were thousands of hardworking people laboring in the cement plants. My grandfather was a laborer. He would shovel coal to fire the kilns in the cement plant.
And so that's him in the top picture with all the eggs.
So he worked in the cement plant, but my grandmother actually, with her children, tended the farm. And at that time, they only rented a farm from the cement company. And
how many kids did they have?
Between the two of them, they raised a family of 13 children.
Right.
My father was more or less in the middle of the family. And this picture right here actually is they raised a lot of chickens, and this is my father and his brother Antone, and they are collecting the eggs. They used to bring live chickens down to New York City to sell, and a lot of the Italian women in the New York City would come to buy the chickens, and they would reach their hands into the cages to feel how full the chickens were. And my father remembers doing that. So we really grew up with people that knew how to raise livestock, knew how to grow things, had fruit trees, and also had to market what they produced. ultimately, my grandfather, John Bulich, like a number of immigrants in the Hudson Valley, started growing mushrooms in the 1940s. So they actually bought their farm, which is still there today on the banks of the Hudson River, in the early 1940s. And my grandfather started growing mushrooms in one of the old ice houses along the Hudson River. And ultimately, my father and several of his brothers, they worked in the business, but they took the business over, and that's known as Bulich Mushroom Company.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my.
Oh no, let's go do Mom and Pop first.
Okay.
So these are my grandparents, my mom's parents.
Yeah. So my mother, Anne Gray, whose father was from Ireland, she was from New York City and Manhattan, and like many people from the city at that time in the 1950s, they would vacation in the Catskills. So she met my father in a place we call Pearling, which is outside of Cairo, New York. And she was vacationing there, and she met my father. She shot him with a water pistol in their favorite bar, which was called Donnie's Green Lantern. And that was pretty much all it took for my father to go head over heels for my mother.
And then they did long distance for a while.
Yes,
right?
so she would come up almost every weekend in the 1957 to just before they married in 1958. And she'd come into the train station in Hudson, New York, where my father would meet her and pick her up. And we found after my mother passed away, we found many of the letters that my father had written to my mother. And so there were times when he would put her on the train and go home, go back to work till midnight, and sit down at midnight and write a letter to my mother. And actually, sometimes he wrote 2 or 3 letters to her within 1 week before she came back up again. And actually, judging from the postmarks on the letters, those letters actually were delivered within a day.
Better than
from
today.
Catskill, New
Post
York
office.
to New York City, right?
And then here we have
Yes.
hunting.
So
There's a glare.
hunting is a very serious tradition in my family. Growing up on the Hudson River, there was all kinds of hunting, and on the land that my family owned, my father and his brothers and friends, and this picture is my father, Frank, his brother Anton, and a man that was a friend of theirs, Frank Hines. And this is a 12-point buck that my father got, known as a trophy deer to anybody who hunts. Mm-hmm. It was one of the largest deer taken in the Catskill Mountain area at the time. It was 1959, perhaps.
And then we'll go up here. Actually, I'll take it down. It'll probably be easier. This is. Talk about this photo.
So this is. So my father and his brothers were mushroom growers, and this picture is my father and his 4 sons, my brothers Joe, Mark, Mike, and Jeff, who were in business with my dad. And they're showing you the portobello mushrooms they grew and snow white mushrooms. Our family started marketing mushrooms in New York City at Union Square in around 1986, I believe, when my sister Colleen took the first load of mushrooms down to the city. And then myself and my sister Tina would go with her to the Union Square Market on Wednesdays and Saturdays, all year long, summer and winter, to market our family's mushrooms.
Yeah, I remember those trips.
And yes, our children went with us.
And then here's a picture of Mom and Pa on the Hudson River. Is that Nick?
Yes, so that's my mom and my dad with my nephew Nick when he was a baby in the waters of the Hudson River. we grew up really spending a lot of time outdoors, and when we weren't working in the mushroom houses, which are really like working in a dark cave. It's cold and it's dark.
It smells like manure because it is manure.
Sometimes.
And
but
hay.
yes. But anyway, when we weren't working, we were outside, and we spent a lot of time as children playing in the river and in the woods around our farm. We really didn't have many material things growing up. We did a lot with natural things.
Oh, we didn't talk about, I mean, you're one of how many?
Oh, so I'm one of 9.
Yeah.
My parents actually had 10 children. Their oldest child, the firstborn son, drowned in an accident on the farm when he was only 3, which was a tragedy, of course. But one of the things that always impressed me about my parents, and my parents really are my heroes in life, was the fact that they were able to go on after that and have more children and live a life that was joyful. And they did not let that tragedy define them. And then this is a picture of at my farmhouse of my children.
Oh, that's old.
Yeah. Danielle, Justine, Jackie, Allie, and John.
Yeah,
That's a while ago.
Point to your favorite one.
Okay.
Point to your favorite kid.
This is I can't do that.
Yeah,
but
there's
anyway,
the 5 of us. And then here's Pa's, these are arrowheads that Pa collected down.
yes, so my father had a real knack for finding arrowheads on his property on the Hudson River, and the soil there is very, very fine sandy soil. And I would walk with him many times, and he just would look down and he'd see it and pick it up. But
that's like me with, I don't do it anymore, but I used to preserve all the 4-leaf clovers I would find.
yes, you have a real knack for that. The only time I ever found an arrowhead, and it was very poignant, was when my father passed away, which December of 2010. That first spring after his death, we were all down there at Easter time walking the fields that had been newly plowed, and I found an arrowhead for the first
Oh,
time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I keep that with me. But we really, I would say that Justine really carries inside of her and her spirit a real knack for growing things and creating things, making things with her hands. And we got a lot of that really from my grandmother, Johanna. We spent a lot of time with her because she lived right across the road from us on the farm where I was growing up. And she was always baking and she was gardening. She loved flowers, and we would spend time with her taking care of her houseplants inside. And then outside, she always had flower beds that consisted of roses and peonies and
Lily of the Valley.
Lily of the Valley was her flower that we would find in the woods near her birthday, which was in May. And we always picked her those bouquets for her birthday. But she grew roses and peonies and portulacas and bleeding heart. She was a very she was a religious woman, but not a churchgoer. She was Catholic, as my family is, and she was very spiritual, and she was a caretaker of anything that she came in touch with. I remember if we found a bee, like a bumblebee or honeybee, flying around her kitchen, she would never kill it. She would take a dish towel and she would very gently cover it up, and then she would let it outside because she understood about bees and pollination. And we learned those things from her. My grandfather also grew, in addition to growing mushrooms, he had a huge field of tomato plants, which my father and his brothers tended to, and he produced those and marketed those in the market in Albany. And then ultimately a number of my brothers and sisters did become farmers. And some of us, even though we didn't farm for a living, owned farms, and we were marketers. So we spent a lot of time learning how to sell our family's products. And Justine has done a lot of that too.
Some by choice, some by chores. All right, Mom, that was great. Thank you. And this is November 23rd. What's today?
23rd, day before Thanksgiving.
Yep, 2022.